All right, calling the Commission to Approve Standards of Conduct meeting to order. First item of business is to do a roll call. Can we briefly have the members introduce themselves? Maybe starting with our remote members.
Good afternoon, Flo Nakakuni.
Good afternoon, Kristen Izumi Nitao, Campaign Spending.
Representative Marimoto, do you mind introducing yourself?
Barbara Marimoto, former legislator.
Janet Mason from the League of Women Voters.
Nikos Leverage, Common Cause of Hawaii.
My name is Robert Harris with the Hawaii State Ethics Commission, temporarily acting as chair while Chair Foley is unable to attend today. The first item of business before we get into public testimony is approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I so move.
I second.
All those in favor, show of hands. Great. The minutes are adopted, and I see that we have a few members of the public to testify. Okay, we didn't receive any written testimony. Is there anybody in the public who wishes to testify? Aloha.
Aloha. So, Inga Gibson. I'm sorry, Robert. Were you calling upon me, or was there someone else?
Inga, if you want to give public testimony, please feel free.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Inga Gibson with Pono Advocacy. I did not submit written testimony, but I will follow up with the committee. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you so much for all the work that the committee has done. I quickly went through some of the attachments and some of the revisions that the committee made. Just a few points. As you know, last week, I submitted testimony on behalf of myself, Gary Hoosier, and Kat Brady. And one of the primary points that we brought up is regarding the power of the chair and the concentration of power with just a few individuals at the legislature, and how that applies to bills being deferred or not being considered. I did want to reference my concern that that issue isn't quite addressed. I did not quite see it addressed. I did look through the Bill of Rights, and there was some reference under it was page 6, item number 12, that the committee chair would have to give some reason for deferral or explanation for deferral. However, that that does not really consider any kind of public appeal process. We had recommended in our earlier testimony that there be some process where the committee and the chair would have to have a public hearing about those bills that they deferred. And maybe it's easier if I put it in context, but just as an example, we have a bill that this will be the 4th year now that one particular chair has held the bill based on a personal opinion that this issue isn't a policy issue that the legislature should consider, despite overwhelming support of the majority. So I would imagine under the way it's currently drafted that this particular chair could simply say, I don't believe this is an issue for the legislature to consider, and therefore that's why we're deferring the bill. So there's no ability to counter or challenge that. So while I appreciate the committee trying to address that, I just fear that that the reason for deferral may not be truthful or may not disclose personal or other interests. I also noticed that in the Bill of Rights, there is some reference to a bill not going to conference committee simply because a chair isn't present. And I appreciate that. However, the case has been in the past that it's not just if the chair isn't present, it could just be a member or a co-manager. So I don't know if the commission really thought about that and specifically wanted it only to be a chair being absent, because again, it's not so much the chair as it is maybe a member of a subsequent or non-lead committee that isn't present, and therefore the bill ultimately dies in the 11th hour. And then finally, for the draft rules, section 62.12 that you all had added because there was not an existing section. Wonderful, thank you very much. I did catch what a grammatical error, I believe. It's referencing an amendment by the speaker of the committee chair. I think it was probably meant to be the speaker or the committee chair. So I just wanted to make that clarification under draft rule 62.12. I believe it should read speaker or the committee chair. So thank you so much, and thank you again for all your work.
Thank you.
Mahalo.
Was that rule for the House or for the Senate that you're aware of? I presume if the speaker would be the House, so that clarifies it. Yeah, thank you.
And I'm sorry, I didn't look at the Senate, but I would guess that that on the Senate side, it probably says the Senate president or the committee chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? I did have one. I guess obviously having a hearing and letting the public come in and interact, it does seem like there still isn't necessarily a recourse for that. So you could have a bunch of people come in and say, I want to have this bill heard, I want to have this bill heard. At the end of the day, it's a public forum, and that's useful, and I don't want to dismiss the symbolism of that. There's not necessarily anything to force or change necessarily that chair's position. There is currently in the rules the ability for members to have things removed from a committee, to ask things to be heard. There is some process already that other representatives, maybe in this case, could do. Have you thought about ways maybe that could be revised or amended or tweaked, recognizing that would be sort of an actual enforceable way of proceeding?
Thank you, Robert. Yes, and actually this is what Representative Bellotti brought up when she had testified that there was this existing process where fellow committee members could appeal to the chair. However, she acknowledged, and many of us, have never seen that used. I think Kat recalled a situation maybe 15 years ago where that was the case, but it is not, the case because that is such a political necessity for members to go against the chair. That's why in our testimony, we suggested that the committee chair would have to announce in advance those bills that they intended not to hear, and that they would reserve a date where those bills would be announced in addition to that being posted, and that would allow the public an opportunity to voice their, make their case essentially for why that bill should be heard. Because again, I don't think the existing appeal process is effective nor used. And, and that's the thing is by asking other committee members to appeal to the chair, it doesn't give the power back to the people. It basically still remains within the political process of the committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
Your comment actually prompted a question, and it's not unusual working around the political process here. Could you maybe articulate what the subject area was that you referred to in your initial testimony regarding the bill that wasn't ripe for hearing in a particular committee because of the opinion of the chair? And also, do you think that there might be some utility in maybe having the legislature publish hearing request letters and emails on its site in the legislative record?
I'm sorry, when an organization or individual requests that would
Correct.
be-
I know from my experience that we've written requests for hearings when the deadline is getting really imminent, and it's very tight because we're in a part-time legislature here. Regardless of whether, especially when a bill is not heard, do you think there would be some utility to having, the legislature house and publish records of people asking and requesting a bill hearing?
Absolutely. I think there would be use to that. But in the case that I referenced, this individual legislator, has year after year received requests for hearings from the bill sponsors, and, from within their own chamber and the opposing chamber, and in addition to many others from even their own constituents. So they have been ignored. And this particular chair has gone as far as, request re-referrals so that it goes to their committee so that they can refer it. So this is, what I would consider active obstruction. This is not the case where there is a genuine lack of competing priorities or time. And so I have appealed to leadership even to, to please get involved. But again, because this is becomes political, there are other factors at play. So anything that would potentially hold these individuals, somehow accountable for their individual decisions. I thought early on maybe some requirement that if a bill is introduced 3 years in a row, that it must be at least brought up for some kind of discussion. I understand with the thousands of bills that are introduced and everything that's on the agenda, already in the timeline, I just see a lot of bills that are introduced that don't have the public support. Those are the ones that may be rightfully deferred, but I'm referring to issues where, there are massive public support. So, I think that's the only thing that would change in these cases. I don't think it would create a lot more work.
Yeah.
That's likely what we're to hear back, that this is going to just, take too much time.
So just as a, as example here, so let's say you have, a real grassroots, grass tops campaign to reform and to improve our compassionate choices law, for example. And the chair of one of the committees, doesn't feel comfortable moving it forward at the time. I think there could be utility in having, expressions of public support for the need to hear a bill in the legislative record, even if no action is taken. So I do tend to agree with you there, and that's why I asked the question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? If not, thank you, Inga, for your testimony. Thanks for your input, as always. Do we have other testifiers waiting? Okay, great. Let's jump into the first item. I'm Representative Marimoto. I think the next one is your topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there was a bill relating to super PACs, which called for a study of activity in Hawaii from 2012 to 2020. And the Campaign Spending Commission sent me some information that they had collected, which is quite considerable, for the election cycles from 2012 to 2020. In that they have collected this, I don't think there is a need for that particular bill. But I note that Act 16922 passed this past session, which was House Bill 2416, Conference Draft 1, which would have required 501c4s to have some transparency as to their donors. And I think it's a very good first step in finding out who the donors of the super PACs are. So I thought that we could expand it by to all 501c3s. I had heard from someone who was knowledgeable in the campaign finance law that there are about 40 501c3s, of which maybe a half dozen do participate in political activities under different rules and regulations. it's pretty complex, and I don't know, it might be, they're not political committees under campaign spending. They're not registered as such. They are regulated more by the Internal Revenue Service. So it's a very complex area, but I thought I would offer it to the committee for possibilities, and we could maybe ask Campaign Spending Commission whether this is a workable approach.
Do you want to
Sure.
pitch that to Kristen?
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
thank you. So I've been working with our general counsel, Gary Kam, and of course our associate director, Tony Baldemero. Certainly this area has been a major area in campaign finance across the nation. So our office has been collecting data so that we can, in this type of situation, be able to represent the degree of whether there's a problem or an issue. At this point, I'm going to let Gary and Tony address this committee because they have synthesized what your thoughts are on this area, and I think they have a good suggestion and perhaps can at least alleviate some concerns or move it forward in light of the committee's issues. So maybe Gary, you can start, and Tony, maybe you can add as necessary or as needed.
So I think the situation involving the 501c4s, that's the big concern across the nation, because you have very wealthy people setting up now, not contributing, setting up and these C4s and dumping a lot of money in it only to run political ads. That's what they do. I don't know if I would even call them a legitimate C4, because they're not really there for social welfare, right? They're just to run political ads. As far as I can tell, we don't have that problem in Hawaii, but that's what Act 169 is meant to address, the 501c4s, which at least on the mainland is a problem. Like I said, I don't know if it's really a problem in Hawaii yet. I guess things sometimes take time to get to Hawaii. I don't believe that the 501c3s are a problem at all, because they're supposed to have zero political activity. So they shouldn't be participating in our political process. And if they are, and we would still make them register with us and follow disclosure reports, we're not going to get their donors, that's true, but I don't think people give money to a charity for political purpose. I think they do it because they support the charity. So, I mean, the farther we get away from the political purpose, the more we have to justify using campaign finance to force disclosure of these donors. And if you're talking about other 5Cs organization, I think we need to be careful with using Act 169. I think it can be used, but since Act 169 only deals with C4s, there's language in there talking about donations, right? Donor donations, and I believe there are some 5Cs that do not receive donations. For example, unions, they get member dues. That's how they survive. And unless there's a situation where there's a union that's totally letting some rich guy or gal use the union's treasury to launder the money and just make political ads and not even be a union member, I think that would be a problem. But I believe that under the union bylaws or organic documents, and maybe even the federal law, I don't think unions can commingle their treasury funds like that. And the same goes for trade associations, right? They have membership dues. They don't have real, and I could be wrong, but I don't think they have donors. So we have to be careful when using Act 169.
Can a union set up a super PAC and then receive funds for political purposes?
Again, I don't think so. I think when the union sets up a PAC, they use their treasury to fund the PAC. I don't think they're receiving anything other than their union dues, the regular union dues to make the political activity, to pay for the political activity.
Does Act 169 affect any union groups in Hawaii?
It couldn't.
Why is this bill passed then?
To address the problems on the, well, like I was saying, I don't think it's a problem in Hawaii, but to address the problem of the 501c4s.
It would not affect any groups in Hawaii?
We do have 501c4s that are active politically.
So it would cover them?
It would cover them. But again, this is not a situation that you have in the mainland where you have just basically one contributor to the C4, which was specifically set up to be the conduit for the rich guy's money, rich gal's money, right? We have legitimate C4s who have been in existence, and one of their, because C4s can engage in activities, so long as it's not a majority of their activity, that they do.
So this bill was set up for one wealthy individual?
This bill was set up to get at the relatively high contribute donors to the C4s. But like I said, I don't see a situation where C4s are being abused by some rich guy and just funneling money through the treasury. These are C4s that really get legitimate donations from regular human beings and businesses.
Yet super PACs are really, they're a problem in this country, and some people could benefit by it. They would not call it a problem, but they've grown so powerful in influence that, and there's no disclosure. You don't know where most of their money is coming from. So I'm looking at some way to find some transparency in these donations. And when they transfer money among themselves, and there's no disclosure, and there's no spending limits, there's a lot of money that's just being laundered. I think in the bill it talks about shell entities, and they receive and give money out and transfer it willy-nilly, and so it's very difficult for the man on the street to know what is happening, and there's so much money that's involved. I've seen one report that said it's $4.5 billion since Citizens United, and it didn't include this current election cycle. And they're overshadowing political parties and candidate committees. So they're far more powerful and influential. So therein lies the problem. So that is why I think you passed this one bill. And I think there are other 501c3s that are somehow formed to partake in political activity. Now, tell me if I'm wrong.
I don't think a 501c3 would be willing to lose its tax exempt status just to do political ads. That'd be crazy.
Well, I think they could raise some money and transfer it into a super PAC. But one of the things, I'm not speaking for Kristen and Tony here, but one of the things I did like about your original draft on the study, I thought that would be good to focus people on how money is spent in Hawaii, and maybe this nationwide, we'll discover whether or not it's happening in Hawaii. Do we have
rich people setting up a C4 solely for the purpose of making political ads, we can really, the study will allow us to more closely track the spending instead of just talking about stories, from the mainland. And that's one thing I did like about the bill.
Actually, I'm not that opposed to a wealthy person trying to affect the political process. There are some very good super PACs with good intents, and I think we've all donated to a few. We have various causes, but it's just that sometimes I think we should know who is behind some of these ads, especially if they're producing untruthful ads or very misleading ads. You want to know who's behind them.
Yeah, I agree. But so if we have a situation where we have that wealthy individual who sets up the C4 and then just basically, because it's a super PAC, just dumps in a lot of money just to run political ads, will our law reach the identity of that person? Yes, it will.
Okay, so if this bill will curtail or cause increased transparency when a wealthy person forms a super PAC, how do we gain more transparency in other super PACs? Is there a way? Is there a bill?
Well, do you have a specific problem in mind?
It's just their inordinate amount of influence, and they call it dark money. A lot of nonprofits who are able to partake in political activity do not disclose their donors because they're not political committees, and there must be some way to force a little transparency, even if it's an opt-in procedure. I think actually 169 is a very good step. So I would like to see it expanded.
Representative?
I'm sorry, if I may, we would agree with you, all your comments, to the extent that dark money is an issue, one which all campaign finance systems struggle with, but all laws in the various states are different, and therefore it gets caught up in litigation. That being said, we agree that Act 169 is a step in the right direction. What that law is going to do effective January 1st, 2023, is that 501c3s that are engaging in political activity
C4.
will have to, I'm sorry?
I think you meant C4.
Oh, sorry, C4, sorry. Will have to, disclose their donors, not contributors, donors who opt in to political spending. So we have to distinguish between who is a donor, who's giving to a 501c3 for whatever purpose they have been formed for, whatever their mission is, and they have to be informed that, do you want your donation to be used in political activities? And if they do, and it's a certain amount, then it will be disclosed on a campaign finance report. So I think it's in the step in the right direction, to the extent that 501c3s have been formed
C4.
to hide donors. Extending it further to 501c4s and beyond, we can examine that. It's just the structure is very volatile, if you will, and we have to look at that. What I like, or we liked about Act 169 is the opting in. It's the notice, it's the information to the donor, and that's an area that could be extremely, litigious. But we're following something what Rhode Island has already done, which is this. Is it an opt-out though, Tony and Gary? Opt-out, or is it an opt-in?
I don't remember.
it's a notice though to the donor, because remember, these are people giving to a 501c3 nonprofit organization, right? And these nonprofits are turning around and using it for political spending. So it's very unusual. It doesn't follow the regular model, but we're in full agreement that we want the transparency. The harder part for us to get over is the urgency of it, because we are not seeing that type of billion-dollar 501c4 shell of an organization, you know, that you see like in the presidential and congressional elections. And if I can take a little step back, maybe Tony can summarize what kind of super PAC spending that we are seeing in our state to give some context to some of our comments. Would that be helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, hi everyone. I think everyone is aware. We all watch TV. We see the ads. They're basically coming from two super PACs, one mainly in particular, and that's Pacific Resource Partnership Super PAC, funded through an organization called Hawaii Carpenters Market Recovery Fund. Super PAC name is Be Change Now. So ultimately, where's the money coming from? It's coming from unions, yeah? Oh, actually, in that sense, it's coming from employers via a collective bargaining agreement. So that's on the stabilization side of the Carpenters Union. Then you have the Carpenters Union raising money through membership dues. The study that we did that Barbara mentioned does reveal a lot of information that goes back to 2012. So over the last 5 elections, as a result of Citizens United in 2010, we started doing these election summaries. You can call them studies because it is basically information taken from the reports, extracted and put into these summaries. You can see exactly where the money is coming from in regards to the stabilization funds and these unions. We do have C4s, and the reason why we wanted to build a focus on C4s because unlike C3s, C4s can engage in political activity as long as it's not their primary activity. But the problem with C4s, as you all know, is they do not file any public reports. So their donors are never revealed. So we're hoping when we implement this bill in the 2024 election, we will see some new transparency in regards to donors that give $10,000. That's the threshold the legislature set, and that's what we have to work with. Yeah, that's where we are with that. So we'll wait to see how that plays out in 2024. But for now, this year, most of the activity is coming from unions or their stabilization funds, two in particular, PRP and the Plumbers Union via a super PAC called High Vision 2020.
Did the Campaign Spending Commission prefer a different figure than $10,000?
Good question, Gary.
To Tony. Was $10,000 the figure that you had suggested?
No, we suggested 1,000 because that comes from the Rhode Island First Circuit Court case. But I mean, I can see why the legislature wanted it at $10,000 because that's what you're getting at, right? You're trying to get at the rather larger type money where, you know, it might have been donated for political purposes. Because, you know, your average person that gives to these C4s, they're not giving for political purposes. So if you make it too low, the law might be unconstitutional.
Okay. Yeah, I want to thank you for the information on the donations on super PACs in Hawaii in the past few years. But I noticed there's one figure of $6 million plus from Be Change Now, and $7 million from, let's see, which group was, I lost it. One year it went up to $7 million, and that was that's quite a bit of money for Hawaii. So, the recent campaign saw super PAC spending, large super PAC spending in the congressional race and the lieutenant governor's race. So, I hope this bill is helpful in increasing transparency for in Hawaii. I'll let the other members ask questions now. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Kristen?
I just wanted to clarify too that these studies that we're referencing are available on our website. So it's not like we're doing anything, different. Tony, you want to say where it's located on our website for the public? So it's not like it's accessible to anybody.
Yeah, if you go to our website at hawaii.gov/campaign, right on the home page to the right, you click on election summaries. You can see the breakdown by election from 2012 to 2020.
I would just like to comment that, I really commend the CSC for doing really good work on this front in terms of the information gathering and having it available on their website. And I would hope that we could refer to it in our final report in some fashion. And there was also a comment made that donors don't give monies to charities for the purpose of political activities. I think it also follows that people don't give money to political campaigns for the purpose of charity. And that's why the bill draft that we offered to the committee, I believe the week prior, reflects that. So mahalo to everybody.
Gary, if I can follow up with a question. You'd, in reference to other 501c organizations, had made a distinction, for example, with labor union dues, specifically addressing the two larger super PACs getting money from employers in this circumstance. Do you see additional information that might be useful for the public to know that maybe isn't currently revealed? Essentially maybe less focused on union members, but money flowing into unions or super PACs that is not union, what you'd classically call a union member due, but coming from another source. Do we have enough information already on it, or is there sort of maybe a need for additional information?
There might be a need for additional information. Like I said, I don't really know. I think that the union's treasury is made up of union dues. I don't know if someone can say, I want to make a donation to the union, well, there'd be no benefit for doing that, no tax benefit at least. But yeah, I mean, if the only way the union gets income is through its membership dues, that's a big difference from being a donor to a nonprofit, right? We look at Act 169, it's set up to be to get to the donor. And
understood. Understood. And maybe I'm phrasing my question poorly, and maybe also it's something maybe Tony needs to jump in on. Is it your understanding, like the Be Change Now and other super PACs that are being identified as sort of large participants, is money coming into those PACs outside of union membership dues?
Yes.
And
Change Now comes from the employers of unionized carpenters. And the more carpenters you employ, the higher your fee, your pay into the market recovery fund.
And is there any reason maybe to seek change with regards to what's reported in that area?
In my opinion, and I'm not speaking for Kristen or Tony, or certainly not the commission, in my opinion, no, because when Be Change Now spends money, we know what industry it's pushing, right? When any union spends money, we know the interests they're pushing. And I think the same can be said for trade associations.
Okay. Any other questions? Representative Morimoto, is there action that you want to take out of this?
You know, from what you're telling me, I think we should not go forward with the 501c3 measure. Would you have any other suggestions that this commission could take to, because I don't see any, we're not capturing any information from corporations or trade associations or other groups, different causes and different professions. So I'm just, do we just worry about C4s and not some of these other nonprofits? Okay. I really don't know what to do with Mr. Chairman. We're sort of at a standstill. But thank you for
I think it's hard for campaign spending because we're not seeing that kind of activity, but of course we appreciate the proactiveness. So it's we're also just trying to balance, any type of how this could get caught up in some pretty critical litigation. So I think it's not that we are, we're kind of at a loss too on how to do this. Perhaps if you want to include it, we can keep the ball rolling and get more input. See if how the Attorney General is going to weigh in on this. It is definitely a nationwide issue. I can tell you the bill that was passed by the legislature, that Act 169, is cutting edge. There are not a lot of states that are doing this type of regulation. So I think it's a good thing. It's a step in the right direction. Are we ready to expand it? Again, if you ask campaign spending, you can see our studies don't necessarily reflect it's at the table right now, at least that we're seeing or that we're aware of. So I should caution that. But we're also can appreciate being proactive too. So again, it's not that anyway, I just didn't want you to think that we don't appreciate where you're coming from.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for the discussion. Obviously, these are big issues, and I appreciate the fact that it will take some time, I think, to continue trying to figure out ways to move forward. And again, appreciate the discussion. Why don't we jump to the next item on the agenda? And I'm going to defer to Nikos, if you don't mind. It's looking at a revised draft of the recording of public meetings, which we deferred from the October 5th meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chair, for working with me on this language. We really pared down the prior draft version, and we wanted to give boards the discretion to keep recordings available on their websites with the promulgation of written minutes. And we also wanted to ensure that if a board removed an audio or a audio-visual recording from its website when the written minutes are posted, that it provide a copy to the state archives, as well as placing a link on minutes if electronic audio or video recording is available. So again, thank you for working with me on this language.
Of course. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, would you know how the DLNR provided sort of an outline of their actions? Would that constitute a written report? Would that suffice for purposes of this bill? I felt it was pretty, not comprehensive, but it covered all the bases.
Nikos, do you want
I
to
think,
take it?
Mr. Chair, would you agree with me that it's fundamentally up to the board to decide the sufficiency of the minutes that they vote, ultimately post?
Yeah, so as I interpret this is boards will have the option of posting audio-visual, period. They can also post written minutes. If they post written minutes, they have the option to pull down the audio-visual if they want to. If they do so, they're being asked to submit it to the archive so that could be kept. The only sort of additional requirement is if you have written notes, you have to include a link, and you also have an audiovisual, you have both, you have to include a link of where that audiovisual can be found. So, you know, the requirements, and there's a specific provision in there that encourages boards and commissions to have the audiovisual available, but it's not a requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Any other?
I move that we accept this bill, approve this.
Is there a second? Great. All those in favor, if you can raise your hand. All those opposed? Abstentions? See none. The measure is approved. I'm moving into the next measure, which is funding grant and aid for county ethics or board commissions, which we deferred at our last meeting. One of the requests was to put in language stating that this was more akin to a pilot, that it wasn't intended to be funding in perpetuity. The language included here in this revised draft includes a specific section allowing for allocation to the city and county of Honolulu, should they apply or should they seek it, or the legislature decides it's worth doing. In addition, it includes language that says, the legislature additionally finds that many of the county ethic boards or commissions lack the necessary resources to adequately meet their constitutionally mandated obligations. Limited or no staffing prevents these entities from sufficiently investigating complaints, providing advice to current county employees, or offering trainings on how to follow a pertinent code of ethics. Providing a one-time grant and aid would allow the county entities to develop the infrastructure and capacity to better meet the constitutional mandate of holding public officers and employees to the high standards of ethical conduct. It would also allow the counties to appropriately establish greater and more reliable funding over time. Any questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to vote for this measure this time around, and I still have reservations about the use of the GIA mechanism to encourage counties to essentially engage in what should be, you know, a professional ethics commission at the county level that satisfies their constitutional requirement to provide an ethics commission. I believe that counties do have an adequate tax base with which to fund professional ethics commissions, and I also believe that, you know, both state and county governments are far too reliant on folks like, you know, people on this commission to provide some of their valuable time on a pro bono basis, and that, you know, ethics is important, and professional resources should be dedicated at every level of our state government and local government toward that end. So mahalo for introducing this measure.
Any other comments, questions? If not, can I call for a motion?
I'll move the bill.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor, if you can show by hand. Any no votes, abstentions? If not, the measure carries. Okay. The next measure is a deferral of the Public Bill of Rights bill. Just as a quick reminder, this bill establishes in statute specific provisions dealing with the standards of conduct, both from for legislators and for publics interacting with the legislature. And so it's intended to address a lot of the concerns we've heard on the legislative process. It does currently create a new office to help investigate allegations and complaints on this. And I would again recommend that in our report, we expressly note that we think that it may be worthwhile to consider trying to incorporate this in an existing office and addressing the issues that those existing offices may have with taking on additional responsibilities, which might include, for example, the resources to that office and or sort of the governing mandate. That being said, as a straw proposal, it's being proposed as a new entity, simply maybe to keep the conversation going. The additional changes that were made include providing 2 new sections, Section 12, which states that the public would have a right to open and transparent decision-making, including the right to hear the rationale for any decision made by a committee or committee chairperson, such as the deferral or amendment of a bill in a public meeting, and the right to easily inspect drafts of bills submitted to legislators for introduction or amendment, including the right to know the identity of the person who provided the draft, if that person is a member of the public or a lobbyist. Any questions or comments? Barbara?
No.
I'm sorry, Janet, apologies.
I'm very happy to see the addition of point number 12. I've been concerned with how we would end up emphasizing one of the major findings of this commission, which is, I think that even though the Constitution requires open public decision-making, we know that the problems that resulted in creation of this commission were caused in part by secrecy in conducting business and lack of respect for the rules of the House and Senate. I certainly want to emphasize this in our final report. I'm hoping that point 12 goes as far as we can go with the point about public decision-making, given that we have a part-time legislature. I'm not sure about it, but it's better than not having anything, I think.
I heartily concur with what Ms. Mason just said.
I fully agree as well, and I think we have stated before, and I think it deserves restating, that a critical component of the report will have to be a focus on the consistent calls for greater access, transparency, overall, and sort of a visibility of the objective decision-making process. The challenges that we've talked about before include, for example, applying the Sunshine Law to the legislature would be very difficult to do with the current time frame. The challenges we have with a part-time legislature, which would require fundamentally, to create more time, potentially constitutional amendments to have the legislature run longer in order to sort of add additional functions. And I think it's important to call that out in the report and note that that may be something, ultimately that would have to be decided or viewed. In the meantime, I think the attempt here is to try to do that what we have and essentially trying to re-emphasize that constitutional provision and encouraging the decision-making process to be done in a public way without maybe some of the more specific 7-day notice and other types of provisions that are core to what the Sunshine Law is currently. But I think that should still be an inherent goal or inherent focus, and I think there are other provisions within this Bill of Rights about access to drafts, access to testimony, 2-day notice of hearings. There's other things in here that are intended to try to move in that direction. Any other questions or comments? If not, if I can ask for a motion?
Move.
Is there a second? Thank you. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Great. If not, the motion carries. Thank you. I apologize. I have the agenda on my phone, which is why I'm fumbling to look at it quickly. So I think that actually wraps up consideration of bills at this point, and we can move into other matters. Is there anything any members want to bring up?
I'd like to have a preliminary discussion of how we're going to assemble our report, because I think it's exactly a month away, the deadline. And we probably have, from the second half of our work, we probably have at least 20 bills that we want to advance or suggest. Sometimes we have context for those bills and sometimes we don't. And perhaps we want to prioritize, call out certain bills. They're not all equally important. I'm thinking in terms of what will make it readable and make it clear that we are very serious about what we've suggested.
Agreed. As far as I am aware, and again, this is for the public to be aware, we are getting assistance from the House Majority staff, which would, similar to the prior interim report, would include summaries of the proposed bills, include the minutes of past meetings, essentially kind of frame the decision-making process up to date. I think it will be important upon the membership, once we sort of get the first draft of that, to start going in and actually trying to provide some of the connective tissue, so to speak, of sort of why certain bills are being proposed, or what considerations went into those bills in sort of a narrative form. I think we've discussed in the past trying to emphasize certain key concepts in the front. I would hesitate to say some bills are more important than other bills, because I think that maybe gives a reason to maybe not look at some of the quote-unquote less important bills. I think all the bills we've considered are important and have value, but I think we can certainly emphasize certain core concepts that are really important to be addressed in the near term, and maybe try to highlight those up front by saying these are some very critical components, and whether it's a top 5, top 6, or whatever it may be, I think we still have to resolve that. One challenge might be is, I think, two of the more important issues we'll be addressing will be coming up in the next meeting, which would include public financing and some of the addressing of some of the criminal statutes on the state level. I think those would go. I think the public rights that we've talked about today might be one. There's others, right? And I think we'll just have to really be quick and efficient in trying to identify those and put it into a narrative form.
Could we talk about a deadline date for having a complete draft? At least get that far, because we would need to give the commission members an opportunity to review the draft before we submit it to the legislature.
Agreed. And I don't necessarily want to take this offline, but I think it's difficult to have that conversation without involving the staff that are helping engage on this. And so maybe that's a conversation we can look into and then report back next meeting on sort of where we're at on it.
Okay, Casey did give us some preliminary guidance on it. But sure, that's fine with me.
Are we still on track for next week?
Yes, we're on track. I think I have definitely 3 bills, probably 5. And I had asked Casey to make some changes based on a meeting we had yesterday with all the prosecutors, the AGs, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Hawaii Prosecuting Attorneys Association. And all these bills were presented. There were no objections. We fine-tuned some of the language, and Casey turned that around in a day. So I have those ready, and I'll be forwarding those tomorrow.
Great. Kristen?
Yeah, I believe, Casey, we've sent over our public funding bill, and I believe there were just a few little tweaks, but I think it's ready to go over to you guys too. So I think we're good to go.
Kristen, do you mind taking the lead and drafting the notice to be posted hopefully on Friday to include Flo's components? I mean, the two of you obviously can work on it, but just for purposes of trying to put it together and sending it off for posting.
I'll send you my bills, Kristen.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other matters to discuss? If not, our next meeting will be on November 9th at 2. Look forward to a lively discussion. I'm going to call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.